Welcome to APTA Live, Residencies and Fellowships. My name is Casey. I'm the current Director of Communications for the APTA Student Engagement Group, and I'll be your host this evening. I want to give our guests a chance to introduce themselves and give a little bit about their background before we dive into our topic this evening. And for everyone tuning in, if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the comments and tell us what year you're in and what school you're attending, that would be great. And if you'd like to spread the word about this event and tell people what you think and continue the conversation, use the hashtag APTA Live. And if you're not following us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at APTA Students and on Facebook and Instagram at APTA Student Members. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, please drop them in the chat and in the comments, and we'll do our best to make sure we can answer them for you. We'd love to hear your thoughts tonight for sure. So let's get to our panelists. So let's start with Sierra Berge. Will you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, sure. My name is Sierra Berge. I graduated Duke PT School in 2014, and I did a sports residency at Houston Methodist Sugar Land in Houston, Texas. And I stayed there for about 3 years. So I ended up staying there working for 3 years and was on faculty for the residency after I graduated. And I did a manual therapy fellowship while I was in Houston with the same faculty from my residency. And then I wanted to get into higher level athletics at that point. So I did the Division I athletics fellowship at Duke. And after that was over, I worked there for 3 years as well. I'm kind of on like 3-year stints here. And then last November, so November 2020, I started with the Houston Texans. And so I'm a physical therapist for the Houston Texans right now, working primarily out of the weight room. So I'm on the medical staff, but I work primarily out of the weight room and kind of work in that space with our injured and healthy athletes.
Awesome, thank you. And next panelist we have is Kevin Posey. Just a little bit about yourself and background and currently what you do.
Thanks for having me. I've been a physical therapist since 2002. I went to the University of Rhode Island, where after graduating, I worked in the Boston area for 3 years and then in New Hampshire for another 4 years before I found out about residencies from a guy named George Davies. George came and talked to us and mentioned these, and I really didn't know what they were. And so at that point, I packed up my wife and my kids, and my wife was supportive enough to have us move down to Virginia, where I joined a residency, an ortho residency, and did that for a year, stayed in Virginia for 3 years, and then moved back to New Hampshire, where I currently live. And now, and since 2013, I've been back here with the same company, MVPT Physical Therapy. And now I'm managing partner, I'm a partner of 5 clinics, 5 outpatient ortho clinics in New Hampshire, and practicing here.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, our third panelist is Vian Vu.
Hey, thanks, Casey. My name is Vian. I did my physical therapy school at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. I worked for about 8 months, and then I did my sports residency at Gunderson Health Systems in Wisconsin. That was in 2018. And then I finished my Division I fellowship at Wake Forest University. That was in 2019. And currently, I work at Samaritan Athletic Medicine, where I treat about 50% Division I athletes and 50% community patients.
Okay, thank you all so much. So let's go ahead and jump right into some questions. So the first question I have is for Kevin. So the question is about when you did start your program, if you did that, did you wait after DPT school after graduating, or did you start right after school?
Took me a while. Actually, when I graduated, it was master's programs. There wasn't a DPT. It didn't start for a year or two after I graduated. So at least the program I was in, DPT programs were starting to come about. So I ended up getting my DPT long after, actually after I did my residency through a transitional program at the University of Montana. I didn't know about residencies at first, so I didn't do any. Obviously, I wasn't even researching them until, like I said, George Davies came to teach a course on his shoulder, and he mentioned them. And actually, he was a part of the residency at Gunderson Lutheran, right? So kind of an interesting circle there with VN. So once I heard about it, and I realized that in my early part of my career, I really didn't have the mentoring that I needed, and it wasn't as critical. So I knew I was missing something. I was getting decent outcomes, but I didn't really know why, and I didn't really know what I didn't know, and that was a big problem for me. So like I said, I decided to pursue them. I looked at sports residencies, although my undergrad was in athletic training, so I didn't really want to spend as much time on the sidelines again. I wanted to be more critical thinking. So I joined an ortho residency, which seemed to satisfy that. So I actually joined a residency 6 or 7 years, it was probably 7 years after graduating PT school, which is pretty rare because now people have much more exposure and understanding of them long before I did. And I'm not sure I'd recommend people wait as long as I did to do it, but I can tell you for sure it was the smartest thing I ever did. It changed the trajectory of my career, and it was very much a blessing for me to find one, and the one that I did find. It was a great process for me to enhance my skills and to basically set the course for my future.
That's great. Thank you. My next question is for Sierra. So which aspect of your residency application do you think made you stand out the most?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's been a while since that happened. But in thinking back on that, I think like in all reality, a lot of people's applications are going to look pretty similar coming out of PT school. So I don't really know that there's that much that you can do to set yourself apart. I think it probably for me, honestly, went back to like networking and talking to people. And so the way that I did it, I mean, there weren't as many programs to choose from back in my day, as they say, as there are now. But yeah, I kind of just went through a list of them and kind of made a list of like 7 or 8 of them that I thought I was maybe interested in. And then I just contacted the directors of those programs and reached out and spoke to their the kind of coordinator of their program and just kind of got a vibe for it and tried to narrow down my list from there, just because like I'm a big people person. And so if I didn't click with somebody, I knew it wasn't going to probably be a good fit for me. And like the 3 programs that I applied for, I had really great conversations on the phone with these people, and it just felt like a really good mutual fit. So I think like more so than anything on my piece of paper, it's probably those conversations where we just seem to click really well. That being said, like I think it's a delicate balance. Like people can over reach out and under reach out. It's almost like dating. Like you don't want to text somebody too much, right? But it's kind of like figuring out what that happy medium is of like being in contact with somebody and making sure that when your resume or when your application comes across their desk, they're like, oh yeah, I remember this person. We had a great conversation. Like, yeah, let's bring them in for an interview. And then once it's in for the interview, like that's where you feel like, hey, is this a good fit or not? Like mutually. And so I think that that's where like the slate, even when I was on faculty, like the slate is sort of wiped clean on interview day, and like application is just a way to get your foot in the door. And after that, it's more about like interview and who's like a good fit. So yeah, I think that like personal connection is probably what helped me the most. I think I'm not really sure, but I think that's it.
Thank you. Kind of going off that, if I can ask you, how long was that process from application to interview to starting your residency?
I think I started making a lot of phone calls in October, and then interviews were in January, and then I started in August. So that was kind of like what I did. I didn't really make any moves until my 3rd year. As far as like specifically contacting out to programs, like I had gathered information and met people at CSM and gotten an overall vibe and like decided, yeah, this is probably the route I want to go down. But as far as like making specific contact, I don't think I did anything until like October.
Okay, great. Thanks. And my next question's for VN. What was one of the greatest lessons you've learned from your residency?
I don't know about like lessons my mentors gave me directly, but I'm going to steal something my colleague gave me. Her name is Christina Gomez. I want to give her credit. But she said that wherever you expect to be and whatever you expect to know at the end of residency, you're probably not going to be there. And I think that's true because a lot of people get into it and they have this big lofty picture of what it's going to look like after. But I think she put in the biggest thing I got from it, that by the time I was done with residency, I was happy with what I learned, but I wasn't quite ready for my dream job or where I thought I'd be. So I really like that lesson.
Thank you. Just a reminder for anybody who's watching on social media, if you'd like to use the comment section to ask any of our guests questions, please do so. So my next question is going to be back to Kevin. So would you recommend, you kind of spoke about this already, but the path that you chose for residency, I guess specific to your residency that you chose?
I'm sorry, repeat your question exactly again.
Would you recommend the path that you chose for your residency to students now?
Gotcha. You know, I think having some experience can be helpful before you take on a residency. I think if you understand really what the requirements are going to be, it can be fairly intensive. And now there's a lot of residencies out there, and so they maybe all be structured very differently. I had to find one specifically that would allow me to support my family, which maybe other people won't have that sort of requirement. Um, you know, I think had I been aware of them earlier in my career, I probably would have done it maybe after a year or two, or maybe 3 of practice first, just to understand what managing patient cases were before going into a residency where I had more intense mentorship, where I had some perspective. Because in my opinion, and it's strictly an opinion, my first 2 years of out of PT school, that's where your learning really starts, when you actually have ownership over those patient caseloads and understanding how it is to actually manage them and take ownership over them. And I think there is a lot to learn just inherently with taking on those tasks. So then to get more intensive into best practices, it might be a lot to do in the first couple of years. So in my opinion, if people ask me, it might be good to get your feet wet with a good mentor on site first before you get into an intense residency. But I have seen people who have joined very quickly on after and have done very well in that way too. In fact, a guy that I've worked with, he went and did a pretty intensive residency, and he's practicing at a very high level now too. I wouldn't recommend waiting as long as I had, but I do recommend it, and maybe as you're saying, finding the absolute best fit for you. I would have loved to done a sports setting. It just wasn't realistic with my family situation. So I decided to do a private practice where I could learn a lot of the skills in addition, and naturally just organically progress into a management type of education too, not just during the residency, but then to 2 years after, where I was there and I got to learn a lot of other things in terms of managing a PT practice too, which was extremely helpful with a practice that was functioning at a high level. I wouldn't necessarily recommend waiting as long as I did, but I would maybe wait a little bit until you have an understanding of how the profession rolls, and basically, learning how to manage some cases first.
Awesome, thank you. Next question for Sierra. Did you know before starting PT school that you wanted to be in the specialty that you're in today?
I think I had like a pretty good idea, but knew I had to come in open-minded. I graduated undergrad and then worked for 2 years in like strength and conditioning. And so I worked in an outpatient physical therapy clinic that had a performance program attached to it. And I helped run that performance program. And so like, didn't even plan on going to PT school when I graduated undergrad. So I ended up kind of making that decision after I worked for about a year and then had to take prereqs. And so like, I had a pretty good idea that I was probably going to go into more of that like sports orthopedic realm just because of like the strength and conditioning background. But yeah, I still went in with an open mind, but nothing really like proved me wrong in school that I wanted to head in a different direction. I liked certain areas more than I thought I would and hated some just as much as I thought I would. But like in general, I kind of stayed along the same track, but like, yeah, was surprised a bit along the way.
Okay, thank you. So I want to extend this question to all of you, but starting with Leanne, what did a typical, if you worked and were in your residency at the same time, balancing that, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so there's a few different models. I think ortho, you kind of have that mixture of you're doing full-time caseload and then you have like weekend courses. Each program's a little different. For us at Gunderson, we had 75% of a pay cut because we only treated patients 75% of the time. Basically, our day was about 4 hours. In the beginning, we would come into the office and just work on admin stuff. And then from about 1 to 7, we would see patients. On other days, we would leave early and go to the training room. And then after work, sometimes there'd be games to cover in the late evening. Weekends, there's plenty of stuff and coverage to do as well. So it depends on each model, but usually there's a decreased amount of, or for sports at least, there's a decreased amount of clinical care time. And then you have time allotted for you to go do some coverage.
Okay. And Kevin, if you'd like to answer the same question, during your residency, how did that balance look for you?
Yeah, again, this was something that was primarily driven for me by being able to, my 3 boys were 4, 2.5, and 6 months old at the time. And my wife quit her job so I could move halfway down the coast to do a residency. And so obviously having the right family structure and a supportive partner is really important. So, so for me, I had to find something where I could make a full salary. I couldn't necessarily take 75% pay plus, health coverage and those sorts of things. So I found a residency that was structured in a way where I could work a 40-hour-a-week patient care schedule. In fact, I actually did 43 hours, and there was a little bit of a pay negotiation there so that we could make ends meet. And then all the didactic work was on weekends and nights and coursework like that. And it was all structured in that way. So that was an ideal structure for me. I had looked at several other programs that had a different pay structure and different time commitments. It just wouldn't have worked for me if I had done those other some of those other types of programs.
Yeah, and for me, I did a sports residency, and like one of my priorities and like things that helped me weed other programs out was I wanted like a lot of hours in the clinic because I just knew I needed a lot of repetitions to get better. And so my particular sports residency had 40 hours a week of clinical care. And then the sports coverage and the didactic was on the outside of that. So sports coverage was kind of at the end of the day. We went to high schools, a high school in Texas here, which it was really fun. High school football in Texas is a big deal. So it was a blast. And then our didactic stuff was in the morning before clinicals before clinic started. And then sometimes we would have stuff over lunch every once in a while over our lunch hour. And then mentoring happened during my patient care time. So that was 4 hours a week of one-on-one mentoring. And then weekends, I've worked most weekends just because of sports coverage and things like that. Not all weekends, but most weekends I worked, but no clinical time on the weekend.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to ask, I think, Sierra, this question might be good for you to answer from Daniel in the comments. Can you still work in sports if you do an ortho residency and vice versa? I know you said you did the sports residency. So are you familiar with vice versa, if you could do the same thing that you're doing with other credentials, and why you would choose one over the other? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. The place where I did my residency has both ortho and sports residencies, and our didactic wasn't any different. It's just that I had like extra venue coverage. And I think like sports is no different than orthopedics, to be honest with you. And you have to be a phenomenal orthopedic clinician in order to be good at sports. And so like you're going to learn really, really good foundational things in an ortho residency that will apply to a sports population. Sports is kind of like orthopedics on steroids. So you just have to like learn the steroids piece of that and you'll be fine. But like you have to have a really, really good orthopedic foundation in order to be a good sports therapist. Like you can't separate one versus the other. And two, I think like a lot of the things that you learn in a residency in general, I hope, are like clinical reasoning, pattern recognition, self-reflection skills, like all of those things that like frankly apply to any population whatsoever. It doesn't really matter. And so it's just hopefully like building those skills in you that are applicable to anything. So yeah, I don't think it matters that much, to be honest with you. That's my opinion, but yeah.
Thank you. Kevin, yes, if you'd like to add.
Just very briefly, I would say that with my undergraduate degree in athletic training and being a certified athletic trainer, I had a lot of that sideline intensive type of coverage. And so that's what made me look more towards ortho for all the reasons that Sierra just mentioned. But when you're applying for work, it's showing that you've got exposure to the things that you're going to be working in, and that you can express that you've got competency in all those areas is really what matters, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. And like me not being an athletic trainer, like a sports residency was the right choice for me because I didn't have that like venue covered experience where like in Kevin's case, it makes sense that he did an ortho residency because he didn't really need the experiences that I had, you know? So yeah.
Okay, so really quick, I'd like to take just a little break to give some announcements that we have. So CSM is coming up this week. So on Wednesday, we have some student events that if you're interested in attending CSM, first is the student networking breakfast. That's going to be Thursday, February 3rd. It's going to be from 6 to 8 a.m. There's going to be food, coffee, and you'll be able to connect with each other. And there'll be a town hall with APTA President Roger Hurt. Also on Friday, we have a Student Ignite event. So it's going to be, again, Friday, February 4th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. So you can grab a bite, and it's going to be a really energetic and fun event. And there's going to be more details online if you have any, if you like to look into this more under the programming tab of the CSM page on the APTA website. Next, we have an APTA Reach 100 student recruitment campaign. So this is a student membership challenge, and it's a nationwide contest for physical therapy education programs. So programs that enter the challenge and have 100% membership of their students by March 31st will receive free access to the new APTA telehealth certificate courses. So more information on the APTA's website if you search Reach 100. And lastly, we have the core ambassador applications. They are open for select states. So if you check out the Engage on APTA, you can find more information on which states' applications are open right now. Okay, so let's get back to the questions. All right. So my next question is going to be for Vienne. So what was on your residency checklist when you were looking into different programs?
Definitely sports coverage. That's why I did one. I did not have exposure, and when I tried to volunteer for coverage on my own, it was really hard to find that. So I wanted a lot of hours there. And then I felt like something I didn't get to do in PT school that I really wanted to get to was research. So I went for a program that had a mandatory research component, just so they'd force me into it a little bit and challenge me. So those were my two big checklists. And then at Gunderson, I just felt like with the interviews, my mentors were hilarious and funny. I still talk to them weekly. So that was a big thing when I actually got there too. It was a really good experience for me.
And Kevin, if you'd like to touch on that too, I think it's kind of everybody has their own experience, I'm sure, with applications. And Sierra mentioned just the connections that you make when you're reaching out to the different residency programs. So did you have any experience with that?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with, yeah, sorry. I think you were a little delayed there for a second. Can you guys hear me okay now? Okay. So I will say that the prerequisites started with, number one, what would work for the family, number one. So, I had to do one of these residencies in my own mind, but it was kind of a thought before it was an absolute need. So finding one that fit my family needs was important. But outside of that, it was definitely one that was heavy in clinical reasoning and mentoring, and seeing what that worked out like. And it wasn't about a specific setting. It was about the critical thinking that I needed. And I found a program that did that for me. I will say that I was very lucky for a private practice. It was at a place called the Jackson Clinics in Fairfax, Virginia, or Northern Virginia. There's a lot of clinics there. And my first year, it was outstanding. We had people coming in to teach. We had Tara Jo Manal from Delaware. We had Marty Kelly from Penn. Eric Hegedus and Chad Cook came. We had top speakers, Joe Godges from USC. It was great. We had so many good mentors and many people I've kept in touch with through the years. Certainly Chris Porter, the residency director there, I'm still very close with, and Ben Keaton, he's the director of clinical operations at the Jackson Clinics. Just wonderful people that I've maintained long-term relationships with, including the owner, Richard Jackson. And like I said, it changed the trajectory of my career, but I certainly made some connections that have certainly continued to help me through the years as well. But as far as priorities go, it was a critical reasoning. That was definitely it.
Sierra, if you'd like to add anything, I know you mentioned the connections that you made and reached out to people in the programs, but if you'd like to add anything that was kind of must-have on the list.
Yeah, I think like the first thing that was important for me, and I already said this too, was like making sure that I was getting a lot of clinical repetition. So I wanted to have a lot of time in the clinic. I think the other thing, like contrary to VN, did not want to do research. And so I made sure that that was not a largely emphasized thing because I just don't feel interested in that. And then I was pretty interested in like teaching and getting the experience to teach. And I talked with the place where I ended up going a lot about that. And like, they made a good point, which I think is good. Like, you'd rather come out of this being really, really good at something than like, okay at a lot of different things. And so I appreciated that comment and that fit well with me. I'm not saying that fits well with everybody, but like, I wanted to come out of this a really, really good clinician. And so like the fact that I was getting a lot of clinical time was the most important thing to me. Then lastly, yeah, I just think like I jived really, really well with the people there. Like, the woman who I talked to on the phone that was the coordinator at the time is like one of my best friends to this day. And then another woman that worked there is one of my other best friends to this day. And so like, yeah, they were like really, really impactful people on my life and my career. And like, yeah, it was just the people that like ultimately sold me on that. And just when I interviewed, I was like, yep, I could hang out with these people all day. Like, this is who I want to work with. And that's really what sold it for me. Ultimately, it was the people.
Great, thank you. So I think with a lot of students, a lot of the questions arise about finances and going into a residency and having already a large lump sum of money that they've taken out for a PT school. So VN, my next question would be, if you did dive right into a residency program, how did you manage finances or repaying student loans, things like that during your residency?
Oh man, I agree with Kevin on this one. I would definitely work. I mean, I agree with the like getting the caseload down, managing the caseload, everything like that. But I definitely benefited financially from working about like maybe 3/4 of a year. Even that much helped. I was able to still pay off some of my loans during residency and fellowship. And the biggest part was living in Wisconsin. My residency was dirt cheap rent. I think it was like $400. Like everything paid for. It was resident housing, great benefits. So I just lucked out with a great program in a great location for financially. So the biggest thing is, yeah, I would work a little bit extra. I like the route I took by working a little bit before residency to get money, and then factoring that into the location, what Kevin spoke about too, as far as looking for a structure that you maybe treat 40 hours a week and you have more weekend didactics, something like that instead.
Great. Okay, so we have a question from Kaylee. Do you have any recommendations for things to be doing now while going through PT school to make a better clinician or candidate for residency? And Kevin, if you'd like to start.
Number one, I'd say make the most of your clinicals. Make sure you're getting your fundamentals down, number one, in terms of your coursework. Absolutely. But start talking to people at residency programs before you graduate and start making connections. Like Sierra was saying, relationships are what makes everything go. So if you can start to reach out to people and say, I'm interested in your residency. I'm a year out of graduating. What's going to make me a great candidate for your residency? And start to listen to what people are saying. Talk to other residents, talk to people who've been through the residency programs, and start doing that homework now. Taking part in the events like this so you can learn as much as you can before you graduate will help you prepare for it. But talk to people who've been through it, and then talk to people who are running those programs to see what makes a good candidate for them. Outside of that, just being the best student you can be and impressing your CIs, because they're going to write reference letters for you. so that, they're going to see what kind of worker you are and how intrinsically motivated you are to make a good resident. And if you happen to have a CI who's gone through a residency, that helps even more.
That's great. Sierra, would you like to add anything to that and recommendations for what you did during PT school?
I don't really think I did anything in particular that was like super special during PT school to make me stand out for that. I think I kind of like flew under the radar, and there were a lot of people in PT school that did a lot more things than I did. I just, kind of reached out to people at CSM. I just did what felt natural to me. I didn't like get involved. I got involved in some activities, but they were like things that I was super passionate about. I didn't just like do a bunch of things to do a bunch of things. And so like, I didn't do a lot of like fancy resume building things. I just like built strong relationships in the places where I was, and just like fully invested in that, and like fully invested in classes and clinicals and things that I was interested in, and things seemed to work out. So I didn't do a lot of like extra activities really. Yeah.
And lastly, Vienne, if you have anything to add, anything you did during school to prepare yourself for residency.
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot now. I do recommend like sports for if you're doing a sports residency, like sports relevant extracurricular activities, just because nowadays, like I don't think I could get in if I applied this year, honestly, just because students are so impressive nowadays. But for me, it's kind of building your resume to be beyond just the DPT degree. And then also contacting those individual programs to see what they want. Some value community service more, some value research more. So it's really about building those networks and relationships, and then understanding how you can cater towards the program you want to go to.
Great, thank you. I know I asked Sierra a little bit about her application process, but I'd like to also extend that to Kevin and Vienne also. So Kevin, if you'd like to talk a little bit about the application process for your residency program.
It was a long time ago, so I'm gonna have to really rack my memory here. Let's see, this is back in like 2010 when I applied for this residency. And again, there weren't nearly as many as there are now. So like Vienne is saying, they're getting more competitive to get into. I just did a search on the APTA website and looked for residencies and found ones that I thought, in fact, Gunnison Lutheran was one of the ones that I was looked into. So I basically picked 4 or 5 that I thought would be a good fit for me and applied to them. And I started to do interviews. What definitely helped was with the Jackson clinics is that my wife had a sister that lived close by. So she had family support. Again, going back to family, it's an important thing to us. And we had that support. So I just continued to pursue that path with them. And in fact, that I had to fly down like a day after a phone call because there was a quick pinch of time to be able to head down to Virginia to interview in person. And before you knew it, I had an agreement in place and it worked out well. So it was kind of a little bit of a whirlwind, but the whole process probably took a couple of months for me just by the time because I just timed it right, but I'd recommend that people spend more time researching ahead of time to make sure they understand exactly what they're looking for, what the programs are, how they're structured so they can fit their needs. But it worked out well for me in that aspect. But again, I think had I done it again now, it'd be a lengthier process because of the competitiveness, and I'd probably apply to more programs for that reason.
And Vienne, if there's anything you'd like to add about the application process for you, how did that go?
First start early because RFP CAS is kind of a pain. Just get transcripts and hand enter all your past experience. But I would say definitely don't do what I did and follow Sierra's directions and like network early on. The places I applied to that I didn't even get an interview, I didn't talk to any of them. The place that I ended up going to, I hung out with them at CSM beforehand. I felt like that kind of helped build a relationship there. But overall, I'd say just overall network, research where you want to go, and then start earlier than you think on the applications.
Okay. Again, I'd like to just make an announcement that anybody who's watching on social media, if you'd like to put in the comments any questions you may have for our guests, we'd be happy to answer them for you. So we do have another question from Santiago. So when it, Sierra, if you'd like to answer this question, when it comes to field coverage, what does that look like for PT with this SCS? I have trouble differentiating responsibilities that ATs have and that PTs have on the sidelines.
Good question. So with or without an SCS, like getting your SCS, you have to learn about kind of what sideline coverage takes. But at the same time, still like athletic trainers are the ones that are like running out onto the field in almost all cases. Unless there's not an athletic trainer present, then I am better than nothing. But in general, like that is the role of the athletic trainer to handle that like acute at that instant management. And so like on the sideline for the Texans, I'm like a glorified water person. Like I don't really have a purpose on game day that is like really, really important on the field, because like that is what our athletic trainers are trained in, is like going out, assessing an injury very, very quickly and figuring out what that right triage decision is. And so like going through the, like a sports residency and getting sideline coverage experience, like, you know, I was mentored by athletic trainers on sideline coverage and learned from them, and still like that's their role on the sideline and that's what they do. And so like I know a lot more about it, and I could fumble my way through it and not do a horrible job. Like it would be respectable, much more so than when I first graduated PT school. Like I wouldn't have had any business doing any of those things. But at the same time, like that is still the role of the athletic trainers to take care and make those immediate like triage decisions. And that's what their educational background is in. That's what they're trained to do.
Thank you. Just so people tuning in now, a lot of questions about when each of you started specifically after schooling residencies. So I know all the time frames between all of you were different. So if you'd like to start, Vienne, with when you started exactly after school.
Yeah, my PT program was kind of like a 2-year program, so it ended at an odd time. I probably would have preferred to start like right after. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I had that kind of buffer to work a little bit. So I graduated. My last day on my clinical was March 2017. My first day of my like actual job was November 2017, and then I started residency June 2018. So that's just a few months. So it was just a weird cycle of school that ended up working out perfect for me.
Right. And I know, Kevin, you touched on this a little bit, but for people who are just tuning in, if you'd like to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, just by way of chance, I ended up starting my residency 7+ years after graduating, mainly because I wasn't aware that residencies were a thing at the time. And so had I known, I may have done it sooner, but I didn't. So once I did learn about them, it was actually a pretty fast process. I already had a lot of, good experience. And I, was doing well working, but I didn't have a lot of the mentorship. What I would say is that I actually, the biggest gain for me was understanding what I didn't know and trying to find out what I didn't know. And that was a huge eye opener for me. And I had to unlearn a lot of things and a lot of habits that I had created through the years. So waiting as long as I did may not be the best option. But thankfully, I kept my mouth shut, and I was grateful every time somebody helped me learn something new and a better way to do it so that I could improve.
And Sierra, if you'd like to expand on that too.
Yeah, I started right away. So I took my board exam one morning and then got in the car that afternoon and drove to Texas, really hopeful that I passed. So I started pretty much right away.
Perfect. And let's see. Okay, so back to Vienne. So kind of a broad question, but from your residency experience and to where you are now working, what's one of your favorite experiences that you've had that you think residency helped you to experience, like something that you might not have gotten out of your working career now had you not been in a residency?
Personally, for me, it's just for my exact path. It's just the training room coverage. Again, I tried to do it without a residency. It was just so hard. But spending time with the athletic trainers in residency and then in fellowship as well, just getting those hours in, learning how to read the room. Like maybe sometimes don't ask everyone how everything's going because nothing's going well. And then just kind of understanding the roles that everyone has. So it's really the stuff that I wasn't exposed to in PT school or in clinical practice, just because I wanted to end up with a job somewhat in the training room.
Awesome. And I'll let the other panelists too touch on that if you'd like. Your favorite thing now working that you've experienced, you think that residency has made an impact on? Sorry, if you'd like to start, Kevin.
Well, I think mine has to do with the organization that I joined for my residency, where I was able to go and teach in a program in Kenya, in Nairobi. The Jackson Clinics has a program that they developed to help advance education so global level. And so I got to go for 2 weeks over to Nairobi to teach the physiotherapists there in clinical reasoning, whereas their training is quite a bit behind where ours is for physical therapy. And had I not gone to do the residency, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. But it was a wonderful experience to see physical therapy on a global level and how we can make an impact across the world.
Thank you. Sierra, if you'd like.
Yeah. I think for me, like, I guess it comes back to like the people and the network that I've built. Like, yeah, at Duke, like I went to Duke for PT school and I very well could have stayed there and done like residency there. But I moved to a state that no offense to anyone, but never wanted to move to in Texas, and have a whole entire network of people from that residency in Texas that like are people that like I will know for the rest of my life, which is incredible. And then like moving back to Duke and going there for the fellowship and staying there for 3 years, like that's a whole nother network that was separate than the Duke PT school that are like people that I will have in my life for the rest of my life, and athletes along the way that I've met as well. And so like taking the risk and moving to different places and doing all of that stuff is like what's broadened my network. Yes, professionally, but more meaningfully in like a personal way. And yeah, I wouldn't have this job here either if it weren't for that network. And so like, yeah, to me, it's like been all about the people that I've met along the way, whether that's like coworkers or athletes that I will stay in touch with for honestly the rest of my life.
Thank you. I'm going to give this question to Sierra again, just because we're talking a lot about, the talking points that you made bringing when you started reaching out to programs. So we have a question from Rachel, and she said, any recommendations on topics to mention or talking points in your first few emails when reaching out to residency programs? She said, that is my next step in the process.
I can tell you what not to ask, because when I was on faculty, it like drove us insane. Like if you ask a question that's already on the website, like don't do that. Like ask something that's more interesting, that's a little bit more in depth than that. So don't ask something that you can find elsewhere. I think like that goes back to what's important to you. Like, yeah. So figure out what's most important to you. What are your kind of like non-negotiables that you need to find out a little bit more about that aren't on the website, that are a little bit more interesting, and reach out and ask about the things that matter most to you. And so that's what I did. Like I asked a little bit more about the clinical hours, like, okay, there's 40 hours of patient care. What does the patient population look like? What does mentoring look like specifically? I think it's always a great idea to talk to like a current resident if you can, because then you get like the real honest, it just feels like a little bit like you can let your guard down when you're talking with like a current resident, just because you feel like, yeah, that's a little bit easier to talk with them. So that's always a great thing to ask. Like the weekly schedule, those are all good questions to ask, but like don't ask a question just to ask a question for the purposes of like getting your face in front of someone. Like what are you actually curious about? And that's usually the best question to ask, in my opinion.
Thank you. And Sierra, again, we have a question for you from Daniel. Going off of Santi's question, could you explain what your role is as an SCS PT with a team like the Texans?
Yeah, I think in the NFL, there's a lot of different ways that physical therapists are utilized. Mine is in a little bit of a unique way. Our head athletic trainer is a PTATC, so he wears a PT hat as well as an athletic trainer hat. And that's pretty common, I would say, for head athletic trainers in the NFL. Our coordinator of rehab is also a PTATC, and he's the one that kind of sets a lot of the long-term rehab plans for our athletes. My role in particular, and I don't know how many like roles like this exist in the NFL, but I mostly work out of the weight room. And so my job in particular is working with all of our athletes who are recovering from a long-term injury and like managing their program in the weight room and designing all of that and taking them through that. Then the other piece of my role is for our healthy athletes that are every single athlete in the NFL always has some sort of pain because it's a very physical sport. And so if there's something going on where they need something modified, like maybe they can't back squat today, okay, I take them and figure out what that modification is. So that way our strength and conditioning coaches can manage the healthy athletes and they don't have to think about modifications. I can just take them and figure out what we'll swap for that exercise that they're not able to do, or help them with kind of just managing all the modifications in the weight room for our athletes. And then thirdly, just when athletes are getting ready for practices or for games, they'll come in the weight room and need certain things done or have something that's a little bit stiff that they need worked on or whatever. And so I just kind of help guys get ready for practices and everything like that. So that's my current role with them. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways that someone can be utilized as a physical therapist in pro sports. It just kind of matters like the structure and setup of the department more so than anything.
Great, thank you. And going back to VN, so a question, again, a little general, but did you have any hesitation in starting a residency program? When you did?
No, I definitely knew I needed help pretty fast. One, from the standpoint of like career trajectory, I want to work with more athletic injuries. So I didn't currently have that at my current job, and it was kind of hard to find a sports clinic that would hire on a new grad. And then the other side too was I just do a lot better with structured learning. And so residency might not be for everyone, but for me personally, like I just do really good with, you should read this at this time. This is first and then that. So I definitely didn't have any regrets starting or choosing residency. And then, yeah, the mentorship, it was the best. I mean, literally every day I had someone around I can ask a question. There's formal mentoring, but just throughout the day, there's so many times you can just quickly grab a mentor and ask, hey, I don't know the surgery, or do you know what pie crusting is? And does it affect the rehab in any way? Like just random stuff like that. So I'm really glad I did the residency and timing as well.
Thank you. And I'd like to also extend that question to Kevin. Did you have any hesitation after starting about 6 to 7 years after school?
Definitely. It was mainly just because of my family situation with having 3 young children and going down to 1 income as a family. That was the biggest hesitation. Of course, there's family dynamics, right? My mother-in-law didn't like the fact that I was taking the 3 grandkids halfway down the coast. So there was that problem too. But other than that, I think just logistics in terms of, how to financially make it work and make ends meet. I had to find the right program to do that. That was my biggest hesitancy. But in terms of professionally, it was an absolute, I had to do one of these. And I'm glad I did for sure.
Thank you. So to be respectful of everyone's time, I want to ask one more question to all of you. Just your biggest piece of advice right now for somebody thinking about either just starting work or going for the residency. What is your biggest piece of advice for them to start doing right now? Sierra, if you'd like to start.
I think the most important thing, honestly, is like figure out what is an honest journey for you and don't let all of the people around you stress you out, because that is like the easiest thing to do, because everybody's trying to like do the next thing and check the next box. And like, maybe it's honest for you to go work for a year. Maybe it's honest for you to go into it right away. But like, you have to figure out what's honest for you and not let the stress of everyone around you like influence a really massive decision. Because like, if you're burnt out and tired and like you've been going to school since you were in kindergarten and you want to just take a year and work, but like everyone around you is achieving and doing a residency and you feel like you should, like you're probably going to have not that great of an experience if you're like burnt out and resentful and tired. So like you have to make the right decision for you and like forget what anyone around you is really making like decisions. Like you have to just be honest with yourself and like really figure out what that is.
Thank you. Vian, what is your biggest piece of advice for students right now?
Yeah, I know residencies are a hot topic, and I guess the current popularity is to do it right after school. But kind of as Sierra said, just because this is a talk on residency, your path might be different. And I know plenty of phenomenal PTs have the jobs that I want, and they do a great job. The other thing too is if you do decide to pursue residency or mentor in general, just make sure that it's not forced and you really enjoy them, because it's going to be a lifelong journey with your mentor. And if you're in a residency program, there's a lot of hours that you're going to be spending with them. So just make sure it feels like a family to you, and you can you want to experience the up and downs with them.
Thank you. Last but not least, Kevin, any advice that you have for students?
I'll just echo what Vian and Sierra said. It's a common term now, but know your why. Know why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you want to be the best you can be, and if you're mentally and professionally ready for it, then do it. And if you're doing it because you think it's going to make you more money, or because you think somebody's telling you should do it, like Sierra is saying, you're not going to get out of it what you want. You're going to have to be all in on it. It's a big commitment, and you should put everything you have into it. And the programs, make sure you understand what the requirements are, but know why you're doing it, and make sure that you're going to get out of it what you want. And sometimes there's different times of life when that's the right decision for you. So just make sure you think it through. And basically what Vian and Sierra were saying.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. So thank you for participating, and thank you for everyone asking questions on social media. This has been a great talk. I want to ask each of you if you would like to share your contact information, if there are any students with questions that they weren't able to ask tonight, if they could reach out to you and either send you an email or your social media, whatever is best for you. Sierra, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, you can just send me an email. My email is just firstname.lastname@gmail.com. Social media, like I'm the most uninteresting follow, and I don't check it that often, so I would not go that route. And yeah, if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to like set up a time to chat over the phone. That's typically like the most efficient way. And I think that's even a good tip for like reaching out to people rather than like sending an email of 17 questions. Like it's way faster for a lot of people to just get on the phone and answer those, and you're going to get more out of it as well. And so, yeah, send me an email if you'd like to chat, and we can set up a time to talk.
Great. Thank you. And Vian.
Thanks everyone for coming, and Casey did a great job moderating. But yeah, you can just email me. That'd work best. It's vienvu@gmail.com. Pretty simple there. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And like Sierra said, hop on a phone call as well.
And Kevin?
Well, your emails are much easier than mine. Well, mine's not that complicated. It's kposey@mvptnh.com. Reach out to me anytime. I will be at the breakfast at CSM with Bay State Physical Therapy, our parent organization. So if anybody would like to chat there, I'm more than happy to talk to you there in person. But email me anytime. And like the others, I'm just glad to get on a call.
Okay, perfect. Look forward to seeing you at CSM. Anybody who's attending and on social media, see you at CSM on Wednesday. Thank you all for joining, and again for participating. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been a great talk this evening. And again, reach out to them or to me if you have any questions, or any of the student member pages on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at APTA Students. Thank you so much. Have a good night.